Welcome back to our channel. For our new listeners, this is a space where we explore two parallel journeys: the journey to mastering the world of personal finance and the journey to accumulating profound life experiences. Today, we will reflect on a familiar topic, but from a completely new perspective. In life, there are many conclusions, many sayings that we often hear, but it's only when we reach a certain stage, when we've gathered enough experience, that we truly come to understand and feel them completely. Or, as the old saying goes, there comes a time when we finally have a moment of enlightenment. For me, personally, it was the same. There are many such sayings I had heard countless times, but in the past they went in one ear and out the other. I heard them, but I didn't understand. I didn't even believe them. In fact, I argued against them. But only after I had matured, after going through a number of ups and downs in life, did I begin to understand and fully appreciate the meaning of those words. In today's episode, I want to share one such saying with you. It is the phrase, "Everything in this world happens for a reason." First, I have to say I am not a person who believes in spirituality or mystical things. I am a very logical person, and I only trust in science. That's also the reason why, in the past, I not only failed to grasp this saying, but I actively refuted it. At that time, I thought this phrase had a meaning similar to spirituality, something abstract and unrealistic. Back then, I saw it as an excuse for a passive, complacent lifestyle, just sitting around, waiting for things to happen, and then shrugging your shoulders, claiming that whatever happens has its reason, and that we don't need to put in any effort. I did not agree with that kind of thinking. That was the mindset of my younger, more impetuous self. Today, I am still a logical person. I still don't believe in spiritual matters or fortune-telling. However, my perspective on this saying has completely changed. Now, I not only understand it more fully, but I have also applied this very saying to several aspects of my life to improve its quality. A little later, I will share with you specifically how I have applied this saying in my own life. But first, I will share an example of why I now have a different perspective on this phrase. The example I'll choose for today's talk is from the recent global pandemic. Before the pandemic hit, I was collaborating with a large, Europe-based corporation. During that period, I was living and working in the US, so to serve my job, I had to fly back and forth between the two continents. Specifically, each month, I would spend 2 weeks in the US and 2 weeks in Europe on a repeating cycle. In the beginning, things were quite challenging, but just as everything started to stabilize and show signs of growth, the pandemic suddenly struck. I still remember on my last flight back to the US, I had promised the team I would return in 2 weeks. We were even planning a major market research trip to Asia. I never imagined that would be the last time. After returning home to the US, I was stranded there and couldn't go back for nearly 2 years until the pandemic subsided and international borders reopened. Throughout those 2 years, all commercial flights were canceled. International travel was nearly impossible. The result was that I was forced to manage and work with the team remotely. Everything became very difficult. All I wanted was to get back to Europe to be with my team. As you can probably imagine, I felt incredibly frustrated. I even thought to myself, how could I be so unlucky? After so many struggles, just when things were finally working, I couldn't be there to work alongside my team. After a while, I came to the conclusion that it was impossible to manage in this remote fashion, especially with a newly formed team. Based on that conclusion, I decided to do my best to complete the pending projects and then I parted ways with the corporation. That was my career. As for my personal life, for 2 years, I couldn't move at all. At that time, even domestic travel between states in the US was restricted, let alone going abroad. Once again, of course, I felt extremely restless and frustrated. But looking back now, that pandemic period turned out to be a very significant event in my life. It was thanks to that time that I was able to make some very important decisions. One of them was the decision to leave the path of working for large corporations to focus on some projects I had been nurturing for a long time. And among those projects is the very podcast channel that you are listening to right now. Today, my life is exactly what I had hoped for. I have obtained complete freedom, the ability to do the work I love, to be anywhere in the world I want to be. And every week, I get to meet and talk with all of you through this podcast. Looking back, if it hadn't been for that pandemic, I might have continued to be swept away by my old job, and perhaps I would still be working for that same corporation. Of course, at that moment, I didn't have the clear picture that I have now. It was thanks to the pandemic that my life turned a new page, heading in a different, much better direction. At the time, I was still very upset because my life was suddenly turned upside down. When I made those important decisions, I was still very anxious, unsure if they were the right ones. However, looking back now, it is clear that the pandemic was one of the most important factors that pushed me, that helped me make those decisions. Here, if any of you have seen the very famous speech by Steve Jobs at Stanford University in 2005, there's a great part in it where he says that you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. Therefore, you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. In other words, what he was saying is the very belief that everything happens for a reason. And for me personally, this has been true. Many times in my life, from work to family to relationships, I felt very frustrated, even heartbroken at the time things were happening. But later on, many times when I looked back, that bad event turned out to be a critical link in the journey of my life. I believe that each one of us has, to some extent, experienced such stories. Take a moment to think back on your own life. Perhaps you'll find similar instances, moments that felt like misfortunes at the time, but in hindsight were the key turning points that led to better outcomes in your future. And now, for me, it's just a part of life. And that's why, to this day, I always believe that everything in life, good or bad, happens for a reason. Gradually, this has become an important piece of my mindset, helping me to control and overcome the disappointments in my life. Now I'll talk more about this point. Disappointment is one of the very negative feelings that most of us don't want to encounter. It can come from giving our affection or trust to someone, only for them to do something unworthy that lets us down. Or it could be an academic or work result that doesn't meet our expectations. The root of disappointment comes from the fact that the actual result we receive is lower than what we were expecting in our minds. Therefore, the first method I use to avoid disappointment is to manage my unreasonable expectations. I often tell those around me that when we expect a 1, a result of just 2 or 3 is enough to make us happy. But once we expect a 10, even if the result is an 8 or 9, we will still be disappointed. Returning to our story, that is the first way I've learned to avoid falling into feelings of disappointment. I tend to always prepare myself mentally for the worst-case scenarios, and I avoid setting expectations that are too high, especially for things that are outside of my control. However, in reality, no matter how much we lower our expectations, somewhere in our minds there will still be thoughts of a better outcome, and that will, to some extent, cause disappointment. For example, before confessing our feelings to someone, Even if we've prepared for the possibility of rejection, we will undoubtedly feel some disappointment.